Okay, sorry for the awkward view, but my tripod doesn't really go up much higher, so it's kind of precariously squished together, so hopefully it doesn't fall. Alright, so these are most of the tools that I use with pattern drafting. Not all at one time, but just at any given time. So I figured I'd just go over them quickly with you in case you're wanting to do that and kind of wondering what you might need. You probably don't need all of these to start, but they're all helpful in one way or another. So first up is this, let's see if I can even get in frame, the L square ruler. And this is good for when you're doing your grain lines because it's metal, so it doesn't warp usually. And you can get that really straight 90-degree angles, the straight 90-degree angles, especially if you're using grid paper. This is a really good way to just line everything up easily. Next is the clear ruler. This is a 2-inch wide and then it's 24 inches long. Now these you have to be careful with because if you leave it like in your car or in heat or anything, these will warp easily. As you can tell, mine's a little bent. It still works, but you just have to be careful because if it like really got warped, it could change your dimensions. So you have to just be really careful with that. But these are good because you can actually see through it. Sorry, mine is extremely filthy. So it's good for doing seam allowances, adding seam allowances, or if you're trying to measure out a certain amount. Next is a hip curve. Just makes it easier to get the nice curve, and this is also 24 inches. And then, I won't pick them all up, but you can see all these curved, kind of clear ruler things. They don't have any measurements or anything like that, but they're good. They're French curves, but it's basically good for you when you have a curve or something like that and you want to get a really clean line. You can kind of just fit any shape you need to. This one is really good for armholes because usually you have a straighter part and then you have a curved part. So you can kind of do half and half and flip it. Alright, and over here out of frame you can't really see it. This is a notcher. And you can see it has a little, let's see, it'll focus. Focus. Kind of, maybe. You can see that little notch right there, and it's a little less than 1/4 of an inch. And what it does is that. And it's a good way to mark your seam allowance, or if you have, like this one is a back piece that needs to line up with another piece to it. And since it's the back, I have 2 notches. And then, you know, the other piece would have matching notches to even this out. So that's just, you know, an easy way. You could just notch it with your scissors too, but this just is a little easier to see. All right, moving on. Other things you will need: a staple remover because of a stapler. This I don't really use too often when I'm doing like the dot paper, but if at some point, you know, you moved it, this is vanilla, which usually you do like a production pattern. So you've done all your paper patterns, you're kind of, it's like your final draft of what you're drafting your garments off of. And this is just naturally a bit sturdier, it's harder to rip, it'll last longer. So usually what you could do is take your pattern paper, staple it on the middle, and then just cut it out, do the notches, add the grain lines, and it's really easy to transfer that way. With pattern paper, I usually don't use scissors, or not scissors, don't use stapler too much, but it's still handy to have. Measuring tape is just for measurements and stuff. You do have the straight ruler, but this is like if you need like a quick measurement, like, oh, well, how much is my waist, or how much is this, how much is that, double check your measurements type thing. And then a pinwheel. This is good when you're trying to transfer lines like from one paper to another one that might be underneath it, or if you're copying, say, a garment in your closet. This is a good way to go around it without worrying about getting pencil lines on it or damaging it, because it might poke a little hole, but it wouldn't be something that'd be too detrimental depending on what you're doing it on. And then an awl, which I think I've showed you guys before as well. It's good for marking those dart points and things like that. It's also good when you are transferring. Like I said, this is the grain line. So if you had a paper pattern on top of this and you wanted to get the grain line, you could just poke 2 holes along that line and then line it up with your straight ruler. Alright, and then of course marking tools. I prefer a mechanical pencil just because it's a consistent line. It's usually a little thinner. You know, it's refillable, it's durable and all that stuff. But you could use, this is a little stubby, but you could use a pencil like this. This is what we were given in school. I have a gazillion of these. But you know, you have to sharpen it and all that stuff, so just keep that in mind. So I think either one of these is good. And then, oh, I'm missing one. Hold on. And like magic, the prodigal child returns. Okay. So, all right, these are marker pens. They're just like a finer tip pen. And I have 4 colors here, and there's a reason why. And when you do patterns in the fashion industry, there's a color for each thing. So, black would be like your self fabric, so your main fabric for the garment. Red would be for interfacing. Green is for linings. And then blue is like contrast fabrics, or if you have like a secondary fabric that's needs to be differentiated. So you have these 4 colors and you would mark your pattern accordingly. So for instance, using my example here, if it'll focus, on this one I have a black line. So this means it's for my self fabric, and you can see I have, you know, it's a size 8. It's, if it'll focus, hold on. I don't know if it will focus. I don't know how to focus this. Maybe? There, a little bit better. Okay, so you can see on here it has, okay, my center back bodice, size 8, 2, and all that stuff, and it's all in black. So I know, okay, this is my self piece. I need to cut 2 of these, da-da-da-da-da. So if this was an interface piece, I'd do it in red. If it was lining a piece, it'd be in green, contrast blue, so on and so forth. So that is why you have these different colored pens, just to make it easier, so when you're going down the list of things to cut, or if you did like a basically like a list of your patterns, it's easy to tell, okay, which one of each one I need, because you would do it by color. All right, continuing on, what else? Pattern hook, just to hang your patterns. Tape, always a gazillion things of tape at all times. And then this is pattern hole punch, which makes the nice little hole, and then you could hang your patterns. So it's a good way to store your patterns. If you didn't have like a pattern hook, you could hang it like on a, like you could do like a hanger or something, or just if you have like a wall, one of those wall hooks, like the command strip hooks. You could do one of those too. That would probably work. They're pretty, it's a good size, so you could probably get away with that. Alright, moving on, last item, well almost last item, my pattern cutting shears. Now you probably could just use regular scissors. Your hand will probably die after a while. These are heavy, so you know that's in mind, but I think partly just because I designed them, it seems a little easier to cut paper and things. For whatever reason, it's a little more easy to maneuver because you're not quite so... You're not up here, so you have a bit of length. It's a little hard to explain, but you know, it's a good investment if you have them, and it's very easy to tell that these are pattern scissors, and then, you know, my fabric scissors are a different size and shape and stuff, so it's very easy to not grab the wrong thing. Alright, and then, like this, I think that's it. The only other stuff that's, you know, kind of like an optional thing, but, you know, would be helpful is dot paper. So it has a grid, and usually there's a blue line when you do the full. I'll show you later when I actually roll out the full sheet. But there's a blue line down here, and basically that blue line is similar to the way you would line up your selvage. So that's your warp grain, and then you know the other direction is your weft. And so you could just, like I said, you could just line up on the grid, and it's really easy. And you think each of these are an inch, so it's really easy to just kind of measure the way you do things. Another thing would be manila. Like I said, this, I don't personally have any manila. This is just one from school that I have. I haven't found any yet that I want to get, but I'm hoping to get some soon this year. But like I said, these are good for when you're done with your patterns and stuff and you kind of want to keep them. Or if you're, you know, if you were doing a business or something and you're using the same pattern over and over again, this would be a good thing to have, because like I said, it's called a production pattern. This is what's sent to do that, and it's sturdier, and you know, it won't wear down like the paper patterns will. Not as fast. I mean, they do eventually wear down depending on how you're using them, but still, you know, you could transfer to another piece of manila at some point in time and it would still be fine. So it's something to have, but not really required, I guess, depending on what you're doing. You can get away with paper patterns. It's just, this is a little easier, like especially if you're working on fabrics and things, because it doesn't move as easily. You can't, this is bent, so you can bend it. But like if you put it on a pattern, if you put it on fabric and like weighted it down or we're tracing it off, it's not going to move anywhere. Alright, the last thing that you could have that might be a good idea to have just for reference is this is a pattern drafting book, and it just gives you, you know, details of how to do certain things. And it's not because you have to follow this you know, by the letter. But it's a good idea if you're doing different techniques. For instance, like this is a gusset, or how to do like a kimono top with gussets. And it kind of walks you through, and this is off of a basic block, so you kind of do need to do the blocks. I think this might walk you through how to do the blocks as well. I don't remember in the specific book. But, you know, you go off of their blocks, you go out and they tell you certain measurements, certain ways to do things, you know, how to create a gusset. So it's really detailed, and for things, like I said, you don't have to follow this to leather, but it's good, you know, in case, like, oh, if I wanted to draft a certain type of collar, you know, what measurements do I need, and how do I draft that properly. So it's just a good reference to have. This one in particular, which is my second one I received from school, is Pattern Making for Fashion Design by Helen Joseph Armstrong, and it's the 5th edition. And it's pretty hefty. So it has quite a bit of details and all sorts of things. It also has, you know, it does have the same thing, like, you know, pattern making tools that are good to have, the way to do measurements based off of like 1/8 inch measurements, all fabric terms. It's really, you know, a good resource to have. So not required, but, you know, and there's plenty of pattern books out there. You know, just kind of look around for the one that you think you might like. Like I said, this is a good one, but there might be a newer one that might have some different techniques, or might have, you know, something more to your space, something. Another thing to have is one of these. Ooh, ah, ooh, ah. So this is a compass, and a good thing this is for is when you're doing, in particular that I've used it for, are circle skirts, especially. You may not be able to do like the length because usually that's too wide, but this is good for waistbands. You know, you can just put it at the point and do it. Now, you can just do, for instance, your measuring tape with the awl and do it that way. Just be careful, you know, of whatever surface you're on, because you're going to have to poke it through. Plus, you kind of have to be okay with puncturing holes in this. I have a few of these, so I really don't mind. And plus, usually they're pretty cheap to get new ones of. And they're pretty sturdy, especially if you kind of go like in the center here. Focus, focus, focus. Focus. If you kind of go in the middle, it doesn't tear anything like that, and if you do a clean hole. So that's another option, but this is just, you know, it's handy to have. Not necessary, but handy. Okay, so next thing on the list I just wanted to show you real quick is what I also brought just to help me work on my own projects today. So first up are, sorry, the light balance in here is kind of weird, so it might get a little bright. I brought all my blocks. I have a pattern for, I have a pocket template, so I brought that. I have my bodices, my sleeve, a circle skirt thing I've already done for myself, so I brought that up just to kind of save me time, because I already have done it. Another thing I did is I printed off my designs that I already did in Illustrator. Let me see if I can. There we go. I did these in Illustrator, and I do have them in color, but I don't have a color printer. But this works just because I already have my design on here. So what I can do is add measurements as I go along, notes, modifications, and things like that to just kind of keep it all in one place. At least that's the plan. And that way, if I do decide to change anything on the design as well, I can, you know, kind of fiddle around with it on here. And I have one for each of my designs. I'm working on 3 of them today. That's a little large to do. So I got my jacket, my rose skirt, and my window pane jacket. If you want to see the colored photos of the, or the colored designs of these and some details, check out my blog post down below. I posted it all there a few days ago. And all that. What I've also done is brought up my fabrics, cha-ching, just so I can check the measurements, because some of these fabrics are pretty standard size, you know, like 58 to 60 inches, but some of them are narrow. I think the one for the jacket it's actually pretty narrow, but I got 8 yards of it, so I think I have plenty, but, you know, just to kind of check as I go so I don't find out later that that's an issue. So I have my rose knit. Okay. Next I have a blue satin that I'm going to use to line my long riding coat jacket, or at least part of it. Like I said, I need to check and see how much of this I have, because I didn't actually buy this for the jacket. It's just something I had from a previous project that I didn't end up doing. So we'll see how much I have of that. I might just be able to line the top portion, but we'll see. Either way, I brought that up there just so I can have it to know what I have for lining. I have this black fabric that's for the shorter jacket, this black with window pane. And then also, it's out of frame because it's on a bolt, I have this one, which is for my jacket. Hold on, let me unpin it. This is actually for the outer shell of my fabric, or my jacket, and it's this poppy royal blue brocade of poppy. So, I think the only thing I didn't bring up was, I didn't bring up the lace to do the top, the lace top I want to do, because I'm not really focusing on that right now. I want to work on these 3 things first. If I can get to that eventually, I will. I'm just kind of not in that groove right at the moment. And then the only other one would be if I decide to line this one, which I need to look around and see what I have anyway. I also didn't bring up the collar. I think I'm going to do the collar in a contrasting fabric. I haven't brought that up yet either because I'm not quite sure what I'm using. But I think I have plenty here to work with. So I don't think that'll be a problem. And I can at least work on the shell. I can draft the collar without using that fabric because the collar piece, I'm sure, whatever I decide to use, I won't need very much of it anyway. So that's what I'm working with. And then, of course, most important thing is a cup of coffee or tea or whatever you drink. And then I've got my big roll of pattern paper off the screen. So I'm going to go ahead and just let this record. I'll probably check in at some point and go from there. Oh, I remember what I was going to do. As far as fabrics go, like as far as measuring, and this might be kind of common knowledge, but sometimes I know it can be kind of tricky to remember, like, okay, when we say grain lines and things, like, okay, what does that mean? Like, how do I line up the grain line? So the grain line, for instance, on this pattern piece, let me see, yeah, you can see it. On this pattern piece, this is my grain line, and usually, it's usually arrowed. If you're using like a home sewing pattern like McCall's or anything like that, usually it's pretty easy to tell where it is. So, but what this grain line represents, if you ever see this line, regardless if it's going this way or this way, that means that you're lining it up with your warp grain line. So what's your warp? The easiest way to remember it, which I actually learned this from a teacher, which I thought was he had a pretty clever way of remembering it, is, and you can usually tell where your selvage is. So if you can find your selvage, that's a good reminder, but sometimes you can't, so you might have to do some more digging. But if you have your selvage, it's the long way. So the way to remember it is like warp speed from Star Trek. So it just keeps on going. That's like your length. That's it. When you go in there into the fabric store and you say, hey, I want 3 yards, that's what they're cutting it off of. Now your weft is your set width. So if you go and get a fabric that says it's 56 inches, 56 inches is your weft. And it's important with grain lines, especially depending on the pattern, to get that right because it's going to determine how the garment sits and fits. Because usually there's one part of the fabric that has more stretch and one that doesn't. Usually the warp is a bit more forgiving than the weft, so you usually have that going across, and then like any stretch is in the length. I think if you wanted to change it, you can do the weft for whatever reason, you probably just need to notate it. Or if you're doing a bias, you would just line up the grain line so it's this is at a 45-degree angle. So that's kind of just basics on that. So I just wanted to let you know that sometimes it can get a little confusing, like, okay, which way? And, if you're cutting your fabric and you're not quite sure how to keep track of it, put a pin in the direction of your grain line. It'll be a little easier to remember. Also, normally your right side. Sometimes with fabrics it's kind of hard to tell. Like this one, it's printed on both sides. What? Another thing, a good thing with the pins is keeping track of which is your right side. Sometimes it kind of comes down to personal preference. For instance, like on this one, there's a side that probably looks a little nicer and there's a side that doesn't. But, it just depends how you want to look at it. So if you decide you want it backwards or you decide that you want it, that's fine. Just keep track of which side, especially on something like this where it all matches. That way when you sew up the garment, it doesn't have a weird look to it. For instance, with this. Granted, this is pretty. You can tell the differences very easily. But, if it was very similar, but one side had more of a shine, for instance, like the satin, it's just an easier way to kind of keep track of it on how it's supposed to be. So those are just little tidbits I thought I would share. I might at some point do a more in-depth thing about fabrics, but fabrics is such a wide topic to talk about. So that's all for now.